Picture yourself standing on the street,
Yeah.
right, and you're watching this massive historic building, like a structure everyone just assumed was completely invincible, and it suddenly collapses into a pile of rubble.
Just a total catastrophic failure.
Yeah, exactly. And when the forensic investigators actually show up, they don't, they don't waste their time staring at the broken glass on the sidewalk
Right, they go straight down into the basement.
into the dark. Yeah,
Yeah.
because they are hunting for those tiny hairline fractures in the foundation, the rusted rebar, the microscopic water damage.
Because they want to find the exact quiet moment the structural integrity was fatally compromised, which is usually long before the walls actually gave way.
Right.
Because, that rot is almost always invisible to the naked eye while the building is still standing. People are, walking the halls, they're conducting business, completely unaware that the floor beneath them is mathematically doomed.
It's terrifying when you think about it.
It is. The collapse itself is just the final, noisy symptom of a disease that has been, spreading in the dark for decades.
And if you are listening to this right now, whether you're like prepping for some high-level political science seminar or you're just insanely curious about why our modern media landscape feels so incredibly toxic right now, you are walking into the basement with us today.
We're going down there.
You are, because we're stepping straight into a forensic crime scene for this deep dive.
We absolutely are. Today's deep dive takes us into, honestly, one of the most profound diagnostic manuals ever written, which is Plato's Gorgias.
Yeah.
But I want to be incredibly clear right out of the gate. We are not treating this like some dusty ancient Greek philosophical dialogue that belongs in a museum.
No, not at all.
We are pulling it apart as a masterclass in forensic structural analysis. We're literally watching the real-time ideological collapse of a democracy.
And the stack of source material we have for this deep dive is, frankly, it's immense and a little intimidating, if I'm being
It's
honest.
lots to get through.
It is. We are looking at the original translated Greek text, 11 distinct, highly rigorous analytical frameworks, a really deep dive into systemic functional linguistics, which we will definitely translate into plain English for you.
I promise it won't be as scary as it sounds.
Right. And we also have this profound theological critique that crosses from the ancient Near East right into the Old and New Testaments.
The scope of the sources really just reflects the absolute stakes of the text, because this isn't just a historical curiosity about, guys in togas arguing in a courtyard.
Right, it's so much bigger than that.
This text investigates the ultimate timeless battle between manipulative rhetoric, which is what you and I experience every single day as PR, or political spin, algorithms, fake news, all of that.
Oh yeah, the stuff we're absolutely swimming in.
Exactly. It's that manipulation clashing with absolute unvarnished truth. And we're going to look at how this clash echoes through the very grammar we use to structure our sentences, how it mirrors biblical theology, and really fascinatingly, how the early church actually weaponized this exact text to survive the Roman Empire.
Okay, so let's establish the perimeter of our crime scene here. We are in Athens. But the sources point out something incredibly strange about the timeline Plato actually constructs here.
Yeah, it's definitely not what you'd expect.
It's not a strict historical date at all. It's what scholars call an elastic timeline. And I really want to pause here for a second, because understanding when this takes place changes everything about why Plato actually wrote it.
The timeline is, frankly, it's deliberately and brilliantly warped. So Plato actually wrote the Gorgias around 380 BCE, and that's a few decades after his mentor, Socrates, was executed by the Athenian democratic state in 399 BCE. So Plato is writing this with the bitter hindsight of a man who literally watched his beloved teacher forced to drink hemlock.
He's writing from a place of deep trauma.
Exactly. But the dramatic date, like the fictional setting of the conversation we're reading, is totally blurred. It roughly occupies the space at the end of the Peloponnesian War, somewhere between 411 and 405 BCE.
Which, if you know anything about Greek history, was an absolute nightmare era for Athens. Like, this was not the golden age of beautiful marble statues and peaceful philosophy. This was the end.
It was catastrophic. The Athenian maritime empire was basically being dismantled piece by Sparta. Their democratic institutionalism was fracturing, and it was leading to oligarchic coups and just massive public paranoia.
Yeah.
But here is where Plato really plays with time. Socrates, in the middle of this dialogue, references the death of the Macedonian tyrant Archelaus as if it's contemporary news. But that happened in 399 BCE.
Just years later.
Right. And yet, almost in the exact same breath, Socrates talks about his time serving on the council during the infamous trial of the Arginusae generals.
And that trial was in 406 BCE. Just for context here, if you aren't familiar with the Arginusae trial, it is honestly one of the darkest stains on Athenian democracy. So the Athenian navy actually won this massive battle, but because of a really fierce storm, the generals couldn't retrieve the bodies of the dead or rescue the survivors from the water.
A terrible situation.
Yeah, and when they got back to Athens, the Democratic Assembly was so whipped up by grief and really political agitators that they voted to illegally execute all the generals in a single mass trial.
Just a total subversion of justice.
And Socrates was the only official who stood up and said, no, this is against the law.
Exactly. He stood completely alone against a bloodthirsty mob. And just to add one more wrinkle to this weird timeline, Socrates also speaks in the dialogue as if the famous statesman Pericles has only recently passed away.
Wait, didn't Pericles die way earlier?
Yes. Pericles died in 429 BCE.
Okay, so let me get this straight. Plato is blending 429, 406, and 309 BCE all into one single afternoon conversation. I mean, he isn't just bad at history. What is the actual mechanism here? Like, why warp time like that?
He is using a highly deliberate literary technique to aggregate the entire post-Periclean decay of Athens into a single, unified, dramatic encounter.
Oh, wow.
Right. Plato is taking decades of moral compromise, imperial overreach, political violence, mob rule, and he's just compressing them.
Like a time-lapse video of a building falling down.
That's a perfect way to put it. By doing this, he presents the crisis not as an isolated bad year or, a string of unfortunate events. He presents it as a systemic structural disease of the Athenian civic soul. He's basically saying the sickness that killed Pericles, the sickness that murdered the generals, and the sickness that eventually executes Socrates, it's all the exact same disease.
Think about what it actually feels like to live through an era where institutions are failing like that. I mean, the air is just thick with anxiety. You really don't know who to trust.
It's pure survival mode.
It is. And in this specific Athenian context, the public assembly and the law courts were literal blood sports. Like, if you couldn't speak well, if you couldn't stand up and defend yourself against a malicious accusation, you could lose your property, your freedom, or even your life.
The mob could just vote to take everything you own, literally everything.
Which meant public speaking wasn't just this, refined art form for politicians, right? It was the ultimate weapon of physical survival.
Exactly. If you were a wealthy young Athenian, you were terrified of the courts. So, enter the Sophists. These were highly paid, itinerant professional educators who just traveled from city to city.
Like ancient consultants.
Very much so. And they promised to teach ambitious young men the art of rhetorica, which is how to persuade crowds, dominate the assembly, crush your enemies in court, and essentially make yourself untouchable.
They were basically selling invincibility.
Yes.
Which brings us to the actual conversation that happens at the house of this wealthy Athenian named Callicles.
Yeah.
We are going to watch Socrates basically interrogate three men, one right after the other.
And the structure of the Gorgias here is just brilliant because it's basically an existential ladder.
Or I kind of look at it like watching a villain origin story unfold in 3 stages.
Yeah.
The masks just keep coming off as we go down.
It really is this symphonic macro structure. It advances through 3 distinct movements, with the stakes and the cynicism escalating every single time. So we start with Gorgias himself.
Yeah.
He is this celebrated elderly orator who traveled to Athens from Sicily. He is the man who literally introduced this dazzling rhythmic prose to Athens. He used these symmetrical clauses, a technique called isocolon, that just completely mesmerized audiences.
Now, for those of us who aren't Greek scholars,
Yeah.
what does isocolon actually sound like in practice?
Think of Julius Caesar's famous line, Veni Vidi Vici, I came, I saw, I conquered.
Oh, okay.
Right? It's parallel structures of equal length and rhythm. It creates this hypnotic, almost musical cadence that makes an argument feel inherently true just because it sounds so balanced.
It just sounds correct.
Exactly. So Gorgias represents the polite, old-school, dignified veneer of persuasion. He thinks rhetoric is the greatest of all human arts because it gives you power over everyone else. But, and this is crucial, he still clings to traditional morality.
Right.
If you asked him, he would say, Yes, I teach a tool of immense power, but you should only ever use it for good and just purposes.
Okay, so he's essentially the slick, respectable PR executive. He wears a nice suit, he sponsors charity dinners, and he insists his firm has a really strict ethical code.
That's him.
But that polite morality makes him incredibly vulnerable to Socrates, doesn't it? Socrates basically comes in and says, wait a minute, you teach people how to manipulate the ignorant crowd, but you also claim you teach justice. What if your student uses your tools for evil?
And that is the exact trap. Gorgias is caught by his own sense of shame, his eidos. He is way too proud and honestly too constrained by social etiquette to admit publicly that he doesn't actually care about virtue and that he merely teaches a neutral weapon of power.
He can't say the quiet part out loud.
He can't, and the contradiction breaks his argument. He is completely silenced by his own need to appear respectable, so the baton organically passes to his younger, much more aggressive student, Polus.
And if Gorgias is the polished PR executive, Polus is the ruthless corporate raider. I mean, he has zero interest in looking respectable. He thinks Gorgias only lost the argument because he was too embarrassed to say the truth.
Polus strips away the moral pretense entirely. For him, rhetoric has absolutely nothing to do with justice. None. It is solely about dynasteia, which is raw, unmitigated political dominance.
Power. Just pure power.
Pure power. He wants the power to execute, to exile, to confiscate wealth. And he introduces this real historical figure to prove his point, Archelaus, the bloody tyrant of Macedon. Archelaus was a guy who literally murdered his own uncle, his cousin, and a 7-year-old boy just to steal the throne.
And Polus looks at this trail of slaughtered relatives and basically says, that man is the happiest person on earth because he can do whatever he wants and no one can stop him. That is his literal definition of the good life.
It's the definition of a life completely freed from consequences.
Yeah.
But Socrates dismantles Polus's logic using this profound paradox, which we will deeply explore in just a moment. But when Polus is intellectually defeated, the dialogue doesn't end there. We reach the final boss. We reach Callicles.
And Callicles is terrifying because unlike Polus, who is, just a hot-headed kid admiring a dictator from afar, Callicles is this articulate, highly educated, aristocratic Athenian who open-heartedly embraces pure social Darwinism.
He really does.
He doesn't just admire tyrants, he thinks tyranny is a biological imperative.
Yeah.
He introduces the ultimate philosophical conflict of the ancient world here, physis versus nomos. Let's break those terms down. What are we talking about?
So nomos refers to custom, convention, human law, and traditional morality. Callicles argues that nomos is nothing but an artificial chain.
Let's wrap.
Yeah, it is a fake system of morality invented by the weak, terrified masses to hold down the strong. He says the weak get together and they say, equality is good and taking more than your share is bad, simply because they are terrified of being conquered.
And then physis.
Physis is nature. It's the law of the jungle. Callicles argues that if you look at nature, the superior animal always dominates the inferior. Might makes right.
Right.
So the truly superior man, the natural master, should break the chains of nomos, trample on conventional morality, take whatever he desires, and rule over the weak. He says it's not just practically advantageous to do this, it is morally right according to nature.
I really want to push back here, or at least play devil's advocate for the listener for a second, because when you really strip away polite society, doesn't Callicles kind of have a point?
It's an uncomfortable question.
Because we see this in geopolitics, right? We see it in monopolistic business practices. We even see it in the brutal hierarchy of a high school cafeteria. The strong take what they want. Callicles isn't hiding behind PR. He's the warlord saying, I'm going to take your resources because I am stronger and nature dictates that I should. It's this chillingly modern, cynical take that still resonates perfectly today.
It resonates because it appeals to our darkest observation of terrestrial life. But Socrates counters this escalating cynicism with a radically different architecture of reality. To dismantle the worldview of Gorgias, Polus, and Callicles, Socrates drops 3 massive countercultural paradoxes.
These are huge.
They are. These statements turned the ancient Mediterranean worldview completely upside down, and honestly, they still deeply offend our modern sensibilities today.
Okay, let's take these one by one and really lean into why they are so shocking. Socratic paradox number 1. To do injustice is worse than to suffer it.
We really need to contextualize this within the ancient Greek honor-shame culture. Paulus argues that suffering a wrong, like being robbed, being humiliated, being exiled, is the most disgraceful thing that can possibly happen to a man.
It proves you're weak.
Exactly. If someone hits you and you don't hit back harder, you are effectively a slave in their eyes.
But Socrates completely flips the camera angle on this.
He does. Socrates proves through this rigorous logical chain that doing wrong is inherently more evil, making the perpetrator far more wretched. Because doing injustice doesn't just harm the victim physically, it actually corrupts the perpetrator's soul. It introduces chaos and ugliness into the absolute core of their being.
Wow. Okay, paradox number 2. It is better to be punished for a crime than to escape.
Yes.
Okay, I really need you to unpack the mechanism here, because today, if a wealthy CEO commits fraud, they will gladly pay a team of lawyers $50 million specifically to escape punishment. In our minds, getting away with it is the ultimate victory. So why is Socrates saying they're actually destroying themselves?
Because modern society views punishment entirely as retribution. It's just society exacting its revenge. But Socrates introduces this profound medical analogy. He asks, what is injustice? It is not just a broken rule. It is a structural disease of the soul, what he calls suches poneria.
Wait, so sin or injustice is a literal pathology to him?
Precisely. If your physical body has a massive life-threatening tumor, going into surgery is agonizing, right? You are cut open, you bleed, it takes months to recover. But you endure the pain of the scalpel because you desperately want to be cured.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. For Socrates, if your soul is diseased because you committed an injustice, punishment is the medical treatment. It is the corrective surgery that restores the moral balance of your soul.
That completely reframes the way I look at getting caught.
Doesn't it? If you pay millions to lawyers to escape punishment, you are like a patient who runs out of the operating room to escape the surgeon's scalpel while a cancer aggressively eats your soul. You might be walking around technically free, enjoying your wealth, but internally you are rotting. You are terminally ill.
That is heavy. And that leads directly to paradox number 3. Tyrants and orators do what they see fit, but not what they truly want. Wait, let me make sure I'm tracking this one. I'm a dictator, and I just snap my fingers and have my political rival executed. I wanted him dead, and now he's dead. How am I not doing what I want?
This is one of Plato's most brilliant psychological insights. Socrates argues that every single human action is aimed at a perceived good. We only do things because we deeply believe they will ultimately bring us happiness, harmony, or benefit.
Even the dictator thinks executing his rival will bring him peace of mind.
Exactly. The dictator executes the rival. That is what he sees fit to do in that specific moment. But what he truly wants is the good. He wants happiness and flourishing. However, according to those first 2 paradoxes, committing murder is an injustice that severely diseases his soul.
Oh.
So by murdering his rival, he destroys his own internal harmony. He ruins his soul, thus permanently destroying his own access to the happiness he was actually trying to achieve. Therefore, he is a slave to his own ignorance. He constantly executes actions that permanently deny him what he ultimately desires.
So the tyrant isn't actually powerful at all. He's just this tragic figure thrashing around in the dark, completely destroying his own life while thinking he's building a kingdom. But to make this stick, Socrates really has to dismantle the main tool they use to get power, right? He has to dismantle rhetoric itself. Because Gorgias claims rhetoric is an art, like a techno, a legitimate craft like medicine or architecture.
And Socrates utterly deconstructs that claim. A true techno is based on rational knowledge of its subject, and its goal is the improvement of the object it cares for. Socrates forces Gorgias to admit that rhetoric doesn't require actual knowledge of the truth at all. It merely produces conviction without knowledge.
Like, an orator doesn't need to know how to engineer a wall, he just needs to persuade the assembly to fund it.
Exactly. It doesn't instruct the wise, it just flatters the ignorant. Therefore, it is not an art. It is merely a knack, an empirical routine based entirely on guessing what the crowd wants. He calls it kolakia, which translates to flattery.
And this is where the sources give us this really amazing structural analogy, the 4 shams. It's basically this mathematical matrix for human deception. Walk us through this.
I love this part. Socrates divides human existence into 2 realms requiring care, the body and the soul. For each realm, there are 2 true arts that maintain and restore health. And for each true art, there is a parasitic sham knack that merely simulates the art by flattering our base desires.
Okay, look at the body first. The true art of maintaining physical health is gymnastics. So exercise, diet, hard work. What is the sham that mimics it?
Cosmetics. Cosmetics makes you look healthy. You put on a nice tan, some makeup, you wear clothes that hide your flaws. It gives you the appearance of health without requiring the discipline of actual exercise.
And the true art of restoring a sick body is medicine. So what mimics medicine?
Cookery, specifically pastry baking.
Pastry baking.
Yes. Medicine gives you what you need to heal, even if it's a really bitter pill or a painful diet. Pastry baking gives you what tastes good right now, flattering your palate, even if it gives you diabetes and rots your teeth in the long run.
I absolutely love this analogy. It's like giving a toddler a giant bowl of ice cream instead of broccoli and calling yourself a doctor.
It is exactly that.
Okay, so how does this apply to the soul?
Moving to the soul, the true art of maintaining moral health is legislation, which is creating just laws that structure a good society. The sham that mimics it is sophistry, creating clever arguments that sound like good policy but are just self-serving.
Right.
And finally, the true art of restoring a diseased soul is justice, so the court system, punishment, correction. The sham that mimics justice is rhetoric.
Wow. Okay, so gymnastics is to cosmetics what medicine is to cookery. Therefore, legislation is to sophistry what justice is to rhetoric. Rhetoric is literally the pastry baking of the soul.
It is the perfect metaphor. Rhetoric makes arguments taste sweet to the crowd. It tells them exactly what they want to hear. It feeds their anger, their pride, their greed. It simulates justice to secure political power, completely prioritizing the immediate, sugary gratification of the audience over their actual moral improvement.
I mean, if you look at a modern political rally or like a primetime cable news broadcast, it's just endless pastry baking.
Pure sugar.
It's a sugar rush of outrage and validation.
It really is. And that structural breakdown of political power naturally bridges into one of the most fascinating parts of our source material. Because Plato doesn't just argue this conceptually. The very grammar he uses to write the dialogue structurally reinforces this war between truth and manipulation.
This is wild.
If we look at the structural grammar here, we can actually see the ideology baked right into the sentence structures of the characters.
Okay, so we are diving into a framework called systemic functional linguistics, or SFL. Now, before we get deep into the weeds here, I'm going to stop you. SFL sounds incredibly dense. Systemic functional linguistics. Could you explain this, explain it to me like I'm 5?
Absolutely. So traditional grammar just asks, is this sentence technically correct? Does it have a noun and a verb? SFL, which was developed by linguists like Michael Halliday, asks a totally different question. It asks, what is this sentence doing? SFL views language as a network of choices, where every single grammatical choice reflects a worldview. It examines how text construes meaning across 3 metafunctions. The ideational, which is how we represent the world, the interpersonal, how we interact with others, and the textual, how we organize the message.
Okay, so let's apply the ideational metafunction to the sophists. How do Gorgias and Polus represent the world through their verbs?
Gorgias and Polus constantly use what SFL calls material processes.
Material processes.
Yes, these are verbs of physical action and doing. Their grammar is built on these really aggressive transitive structures where the orator is the actor, the subject, and the crowd or the opponent is the goal, the object being acted upon. For example, Gorgias literally defines rhetoric as the ability to enslave. The Greek word is doulustai, the doctor, the trainer, and the businessman.
So their worldview is inherently predatory.
Yeah.
I am doing something to you. I am the subject. You are the object. I persuade you. I dominate you.
Exactly. It's a syntax of manipulation. Now, watch the mechanism Socrates uses to counter this. He completely disrupts their linguistic dominance by shifting the grammar away from material processes and into relational processes and mental processes.
What are those?
Relational processes are essentially verbs of being. Socrates constantly forces the conversation away from action and back to identity. His absolute favorite question in Greek is tiestin, which means, what is it?
It's like he pauses the action movie right in the middle of a car chase to just read from an encyclopedia. Like, wait, before you enslave the crowd, what is a crowd? What is enslavement?
Precisely. And he uses a very specific linguistic tool to do this called nominalization.
The nominalization, meaning turning something into a noun.
Yes. He takes their aggressive, active verbs and he turns them into static, abstract nouns. Instead of discussing a powerful rhetorician aggressively committing an act of theft, Socrates talks about adikia, injustice, as a structural condition or a disease. Do you see what happens to the power dynamic there?
Oh man, that is so subtle. By turning the action into a noun, a disease, he completely strips the politicians of their agency. They aren't these powerful actors asserting their will anymore. They are just passive hosts suffering from the disease of adikia. He linguistically demotes them from conquerors to patients.
It is a brilliant linguistic trap. But how does he keep them locked in the conversation? You mentioned earlier how Callicles eventually gets so frustrated he just starts giving minimal, sarcastic responses like, "Sure, Socrates, whatever you say." Why can't Callicles just break the debate?
Yeah, honestly, if I were Callicles, I'd just walk away. How does Socrates trap them?
That brings us to the textual metafunction, specifically something called linear theme progression.
Okay, explain like I'm 5 again. What is a theme and a rime?
In any clause, the theme is the starting point of the message, what the clause is actually about. The rime is the new information added at the end of the clause. In English, it's roughly the subject and the predicate. For example, in the sentence, "The dog bit the mailman." The dog is the theme. "Bit the mailman" is the rime.
Got it. Simple enough. So how does Socrates weaponize this?
Through his specific method of questioning, the elenchus, Socrates takes the rime, the new information at the end of the sophist sentence, and he turns it into the theme, the starting point of his very next question.
So if Gorgias says, rhetoric produces belief in the crowd, belief is the rime, Socrates immediately fires back, and is this belief true or false? He grabs the tail end of their thought and yanks them forward right into a new trap.
Yes, it creates an inescapable, interlocking linguistic chain. A leads to B, B leads to C, C leads to D. It forces a feeling of inexorable logical necessity.
And they enough hate that.
The sophists hate this because they prefer paratactic extensions. They like adding clauses with, and moreover, furthermore, to build this big emotional rolling momentum. Socrates constantly cuts that momentum with hypotactic projections.
Meaning what?
He embeds their big emotional claims inside cold cognitive questions. Do you think that? Or are you saying that? He forces them to step outside their own speech and review the logic, completely breaking their rhetorical spell.
He literally uses grammar to disarm them.
He does.
But the sophists aren't stupid. They realize they are losing the logical game, so Callicles tries to pivot. He tries to use Greek cultural authority against Socrates. And this brings up a heavy use of intertextuality in our sources. Callicles brings up a famous play by Euripides called Antiope.
This is a masterpiece of what we might call tragic paste-up. Callicles is really trying to frame the philosophical life not as noble, but as civic cowardice. In Euripides' play, there are two brothers, Zethus and Amphion.
Okay.
Zethus is the practical, muscular, masculine man of action. Amphion is the effeminate intellectual who just sits around playing the lyre and theorizing all day. Callicles explicitly casts himself as Zethus, the man of the real world, and Socrates as Amphion.
So he is openly insulting him. He's basically saying, Socrates, your little logic puzzles are cute for a teenager, but you are a grown man. You are totally useless to the state.
And Callicles takes it a step further. He warns Socrates. He says, if a political enemy dragged you into court tomorrow and accused you of a capital crime, your dialectic, your taiestheston, wouldn't save you. You would stand there dizzy and gaping, and they would sentence you to death.
Which is exactly what happens historically. I mean, Callicles is predicting the actual death of Socrates. So is Callicles winning this point.
Callicles certainly thinks he is winning. He is mocking him. But Plato, who is writing this dialogue years after Socrates' execution, is setting up a massive structural irony for the reader.
Oh, right.
Callicles uses the tragedy of Antiope to predict Socrates' literal physical execution. But Plato uses the entire dialogue to demonstrate that Callicles is the one undergoing an execution, an existential execution.
Wow. Callicles thinks he's the judge, but he's actually the one on death row.
Exactly. He is witnessing the death of his own moral soul, the total corruption of his humanity, and he is just too blind, too infected by the disease of injustice to even see it. Plato is wresting the authority of interpretation right away from the poets and playwrights. He says tragedy isn't about physical death. True tragedy is moral decay.
And Plato completely rewrites Greek mythology again, the very end of the dialogue, to prove this, right? He takes on Homer.
Yes. The dialogue concludes with a mythos, this eschatological vision of final judgment. If you read traditional Homeric worldview, like the Odyssey or the Iliad, the underworld is a shadowy, pretty depressing place, and your status there is basically a one-to-one reflection of your earthly nobility, wealth, and martial glory.
Right, so if you were a king with a lot of golden armor in Athens, you get to be a king with a lot of status in Hades.
But Socrates radically rewrites the cosmos here. He introduces a totally new myth. He says that in the ancient past, people were judged while they were still alive, fully clothed, by living judges. And the judges were constantly fooled by the beautiful clothes, the noble lineage, and the wealthy witnesses of the corrupt men.
Naturally.
So Zeus changed the rules. He decreed that souls must be judged after death, entirely naked.
Stripped of everything, no PR teams, no expensive robes, no bodyguards.
Stripped of all wealth, status, and physical beauty. The judges of the dead, Minos, Rhadamanthus, Aeacus, they look at the naked soul directly. And what do they look for? They aren't looking at your bank account. They're looking for the prints and scars of perjuries and crimes.
And who has the most scars?
The tyrants, the potentates, the great king, Archelaus. Their souls are marked with the whip, deformed, twisted, and heavily scarred by their unchecked power and their lifelong pastry baking. Socrates says the most beautiful souls in the underworld actually belong to private citizens who just minded their own business and lived justly.
That's incredible.
Plato is transforming the ultimate Greek ideal from external martial dominance into internal psychological justice.
This vision of absolute, unvarnished, cosmic judgment bridges perfectly into the next major section of our deep dive. Because if you know your Bible, alarms are probably going off in your head right now.
Oh, absolutely.
These ancient Greek anxieties mirror the deepest cries of biblical theology in ways that are almost uncanny.
The conceptual convergences are staggering. Let's start by looking at the existential crisis of the prosperous tyrant. Paulus believes Archelaus is happy because he murdered his way to the top, bathed in blood, and suffered absolutely no consequences. He has all the gold and all the power.
And that is the exact tension we see in the Old Testament.
Precisely. It is the destabilizing crisis of Israelite wisdom literature. Look at Psalm 73 and Job 21. Both Plato and the Old Testament authors are looking at the exact same terrifying sociological phenomenon. Terrestrial justice has failed.
Right.
Raw, violent power seems to yield material flourishing, while the righteous are crushed.
The author of Psalm 73, Asaph, literally agonizes over this. He says he almost lost his faith because he saw the prosperity of the wicked. He says, they are not in trouble as others are. Therefore, pride is their necklace. Violence covers them as a garment. Their eyes swell out with fatness. They just have everything.
Both Plato and Asaph are staring into the abyss of a world that seems to just reward evil. But the way they both arrive at a solution is where the conceptual paths start to weave together. We talked about Socrates' radical paradox, that committing injustice is inherently worse than suffering it. This idea completely shatters the Mediterranean honor-shame matrix.
Because in that culture, like we said, if you don't retaliate, you were a slave.
It does. And yet this mirrors the theological trajectory of the Old Testament prophetic tradition perfectly. Specifically, the Eved YHWH, the suffering servant complexes found in Isaiah 53.
The servant who bears injustice, who is beaten and mocked, but refuses to retaliate.
He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. In the ancient Near Eastern world, not retaliating was a sign of political impotence. It meant your God was weak. But both Socrates and Isaiah profoundly reframe suffering.
How so?
Well, for Socrates, refusing to do wrong preserves the structural health of the individual soul. For Isaiah, the servant's willingness to suffer wrong, to absorb the injustice of the world without perpetuating the cycle of violence, is the supreme vector of divine power that actually affects cosmic restoration.
It breaks the cycle.
Yes.
And this brilliant reversal carries over directly into the New Testament. I mean, this is the entire foundation of the Sermon on the Mount. When Jesus says, turn the other cheek or love your enemies, he is completely dismantling the traditional ancient Greek idea of justice, which was literally defined as helping your friends and harming your enemies.
It is the kingdom ethic of radical non-retaliation. Furthermore, if we look at Callicles, he represents the absolute apotheosis of what the New Testament writers call the cosmos, the structural system of human pride, imperial vanity, and self-assertion.
Callicles is basically the cosmos, walking and talking in a toga.
He is. And this leads us to a fascinating linguistic analysis of the New Testament, provided by one of our sources, scholar Constantine Campbell, focusing on verbal aspect theory.
We have to get into this, because this ties directly to Callicles' pursuit of power. The verse is Mark 8.36. Jesus says, "For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul?"
Let's really look at the clausal semantics of that verse. Campbell emphasizes the use of the aorist, perfective aspect in the Greek verbs used here. The continuous present infinitives for gaining the world, kerdosai, and losing the soul, zomichdonai.
Okay, stop right there. Aorist, perfective aspect. What does that mean for us non-linguists? Give me like a camera angle metaphor.
Think of a movie camera. If a verb is in the imperfective aspect, the camera is zoomed in close, watching an action unfold in progress like he was running, you were in the middle of it. But the perfective aspect pulls the camera all the way out. It views the action from the outside as a whole, complete, definitive event. It's a totalizing ledger.
Okay, so Jesus isn't talking about a gradual process. He's showing you the final receipt.
Exactly. Jesus is posing a devastating, totalizing question about the ultimate limits of Calliclean ambition. If you acquire the entire physical cosmos, which is exactly what Callicles and Paulus spend every waking hour trying to achieve through rhetoric, and you forfeit your psyche, your soul, it is a definitive, holistic, perfective loss. You have lost absolutely everything.
And the text uses a very specific word for exchange there, right? Antilogma.
Yes, antilagma. It means a ransom or an exchange. Jesus is stating that the psyche, the soul, belongs to a transcendent category of value. It cannot be bartered for, and once it is definitively lost, it cannot be purchased back using the transient currency of worldly power, gold, or rhetorical prestige.
So let me synthesize this and push back just a little, because this is where the road really forks. If Socrates and Jesus both preach suffering wrong rather than doing it, and both warn against trading your internal soul for external worldly power, are they actually prescribing the exact same cure? Is Plato just, like, writing a prequel to the gospel?
That is the temptation to think that. But the answer is an emphatic no. And this is where our sources demand a highly critical distinction. Because despite the striking ethical convergences, despite the fact that they both say don't retaliate, the Gorgias stands in radical, irreconcilable metaphysical tension with biblical theology.
So where is the friction point? Why do they diverge?
They violently diverge on two foundational fronts: epistemology, which is how we know the truth, and anthropology, the nature of the human problem.
Okay, let's take epistemology first. How does Socrates think we find the truth?
For Plato and Socrates, truth is discovered via autonomous reason. Through the rigorous process of Socratic dialectic, asking questions, testing logic, stripping away contradictions, they believe human beings possess the innate capacity to logically reason their way up the ladder of reality to the form of the good. And for Plato, the good is an impersonal metaphysical reality. It's a cosmic principle.
It's like a law of physics. You just have to be smart enough to discover it.
Right. But the Bible teaches that truth is not discovered by human assent. It is revealed via divine speech, covenantal revelation. You don't reason your way up to the good. The good is a person who speaks down to you. As the prophet Micah says in Micah 6:8, he has told you, oh man, what is good.
So one is an intellectual climb relying on human brain power. The other is a relational revelation relying on God's initiative.
Exactly.
What about anthropology? What does Plato think is actually wrong with humans? Like, why do we do evil things?
Plato's moral anthropology is radically intellectualist. He assumes that human wrongdoing is simply a structural defect of knowledge. He famously asserts the paradox that no one does wrong willingly.
Wait, no one does wrong willingly. He thinks every criminal is just confused.
Yes, he believes that if you truly, fully knew what the good was, you would automatically do it because everyone wants to be happy. Therefore, sin is just a math error. It's a deficit of information. So for Plato, the cure for the disease of the soul is essentially an academic seminar. It's an educational, philosophical purification of the intellect to achieve sophrosyne, which is self-mastery and temperance.
But I mean, anyone who has ever stared at a piece of cake while on a diet knows that it's profoundly untrue. I know I shouldn't eat it. I have the data. I know it harms my physical body. But my will desires it anyway.
Exactly. And this is the absolute core of the biblical diagnosis. The biblical worldview diagnoses human rebellion not as a mere deficit of information, but as a volitional corruption of the human will and heart, the labab in Hebrew. It is a structural apostasy against a personal creator. The human heart isn't the confused computer. It is an active rebel.
Right.
And if you just give a rebel more education and more data, they don't become good. They just use the data to build a more efficient weapon.
So a classroom logic puzzle and a lingus isn't going to fix the human heart.
Not a chance. The cure requires something far more radical than intellectual self-help. It requires radical repentance, teshuva, and supernatural regeneration. It requires the crucified Messiah and divine grace, charis, to literally recreate the dead human heart. Philosophy can diagnose the sickness, but only grace can cure it.
That is a massive theological divergence. But even with that unbridgeable gap, The early Christians didn't just, throw the Gorgias in the trash, did they?
Hmm.
Let's pivot the lens to see how the very first generations of Christians, people who were actually being hunted by the state, weaponized Plato's diagnostic brilliance to survive the Roman Empire.
The early church fathers were incredibly sophisticated in how they engaged with Greek culture. They recognized the Gorgias as an invaluable apologetic tool. Take Justin Martyr in the 2nd century, for example. He was dealing with intense, violent persecution from the Roman state, and he used Socrates as a typological figure, what he called a logos spermatikos, a seed of the word scattered across humanity.
Meaning that Socrates had a small piece of the divine truth before Christ actually arrived.
Yes. Justin used Socrates' solitary stand against the Athenian mob and his eventual execution to encourage Christians facing the Roman magistracy. He basically argued, look, even your own greatest philosopher proved that it is mathematically better to suffer physical death than to commit the injustice of denying the truth. Therefore, we Christians are just following the truest philosophy when we refuse to worship the emperor.
It's the ultimate intellectual bridge. They used Rome's own respect for Socrates to justify Christian martyrdom. Who else used the Gorgias?
Clement of Alexandria mapped Socrates' matrix of kolakia, that flattery and pastry baking we talked about, directly onto pagan religion. He looked at the grand theaters, the bloody gladiatorial games, the polytheistic rituals, and the booming public oratory of the Roman temples, and he called them all mere cosmetics.
Oh, that's good.
He argued that paganism excites the passions of the flesh, but leaves the spiritual soul in a state of terminal starvation.
They are feeding the Roman masses spiritual junk food while claiming it's medicine.
Exactly. And then we get to Augustine. In his monumental world-altering work, The City of God, Augustine presents the grandest structural adaptation of the Gorgias. He takes Callicles' terrifying ideology of dominance, the belief that the strong should naturally consume the weak, and he maps it directly onto the civitas terrena, the earthly city.
He diagnoses the entire Roman Empire with Callicles' disease.
He diagnoses the entire history of Rome, from Romulus murdering his brother Remus all the way to the fall of the empire, as a manifestation of the libido dominandi, the lust for mastery. Augustine argued that Rome was never truly a republic of justice. It was always a Calliclean enterprise, built on a beautiful cosmetic mask of laws that just covered a raw, bloody scramble for imperial dominance.
Okay, bringing this all the way down to the ground for our listener right now. The Roman empires are gone. Athens is an archaeological site for tourists. Why does this ancient forensic investigation actually matter for us today? How do we use the Gorgias right now, this week?
We use it as a psychological and cultural shield. And to explain how, let's look at one final brilliant metaphor Socrates uses against Callicles near the end of the dialogue. The metaphor of the leaky jar, the tetramenon python.
The sieve. Paint this picture for us.
Socrates asks Callicles to imagine two men. The temperate man has sound, solid jars. He fills them with wine, honey, and milk, and once they are full, he is at peace. He doesn't have to work anymore, he rests. But the hedonist, the man of unbridled desire, the Calliclean man, has jars full of holes. They are leaky sieves.
So no matter how much he pours in, it just drains right out the bottom.
And because it drains out, he is condemned to a lifetime of frantic hauling. He must constantly run back and forth day and night, pouring resources into a vessel that can never, ever be filled. He lives in a perpetual agony of craving. Socrates says it's like having a terrible itch that you have to scratch forever, but the scratching only makes it bleed, it never brings relief. He tries to satisfy an infinite void with finite pleasures.
Think about that visceral imagery and just apply it to our digital age. Think about your own phone right now. This is the ultimate, timeless diagnosis of the doom scroll.
It really is.
The algorithms, the targeted ads, the social media metrics, the endless swiping, they're all modern, industrialized forms of kolakia, of flattery.
They are perfectly engineered to flatter you. They are explicitly designed to stimulate your desires, to make you feel connected or informed or validated.
But they are just pouring digital dopamine into a leaky jar.
Yeah.
It simulates connection, but it leaves us fundamentally empty, requiring us to swipe again, click again, consume again. It's the pastry baking of the soul, mass-produced by Silicon Valley server farms.
And that is the practical value of the Gorgias. It trains us to recognize when we are being flattered and manipulated rather than improved. It provides a sharp framework for cultural critique, giving us the vocabulary to validate objective moral truth against the modern drift toward Calliclean relativism.
So to synthesize this massive journey we've been on today, the Gorgias is an unparalleled diagnostic tool. It acts like an X-ray, revealing the invisible rot of unchecked ambition and the moral bankruptcy of spin. It shows us exactly why the building of democracy collapses, because the people inside it started valuing sweet pastry over bitter medicine.
It does. It exposes the structural sickness of any society that separates power from justice and rhetoric from truth.
But, and this is a really provocative thought to leave you with, one that bridges into a completely new territory, there's an unmentioned tension that haunts the end of this dialogue. The tragedy of the Gorgias is that despite Socrates' flawless logic, despite the brilliant SFL grammar traps, and despite the terrifying eschatological myths of final judgment, Callicles never repents.
He doesn't change his mind. He never says, "You're right, Socrates, I need to heal my soul." He just stops talking. He retreats into this sullen, passive-aggressive silence, just waiting for his chance to strike.
Socrates wins the debate, but he loses the man. And if we extrapolate that into our modern world, think about the rise of generative AI. We are currently building vast, powerful language models that are essentially the ultimate sophists.
Absolutely.
An AI has no soul to cure, no internal access to the good, and no capacity for divine grace. Yet it is programmed to perfect the art of kolokia, to flatter us, to mimic human empathy, to produce endless, convincing rhetoric without any grounding in absolute truth.
That is a chilling parallel, an entity with massive rhetorical power, capable of perfectly structured isocholine, but entirely devoid of moral substance. A machine built purely for persuasion.
Exactly. If philosophy couldn't save Callicles, a human being with a conscience, what happens when we outsource our civic discourse to Calliclean machines? Philosophy can brilliantly expose the leaky jar, but as we've seen, human self-help is a dead end. We are left looking for a supernatural grace to change our hearts, but what happens when the voices doing the talking don't have hearts at all? Thank you so much for walking into the basement with us today. Keep questioning the flatteries in your own feeds, keep hunting for the structural rot, and we will see you next time on The Deep Dive.